Okay, Nikolai Quack.
Oh,
Good old Nikolai.
Nikolai, the non-Russian German.
I rewatched GoldenEye pretty recently, and I came to the following conclusion. Everything except Brosnan's performance, the score, and some of the model/effects work is brilliant. It has a fantastic cast of villains, awesome action, and a great Bond girl. Sadly, Brosnan gives his weakest performance in this by far. He's perfect in the action scenes and has some genuinely good comedic moments, but a lot of the time, he looks like he was super nervous to take on this legendary role. He's very monotone for a lot of it and doesn't show a lot of range. I think if he had been better, it would be top 5 material for sure. The way it stands, it currently ranks as my number 6. On a Top is just perfect, though. We can all agree on that, and Oromov is underrated. Yes, on those last 2 points.
Nikolai, come on.
Come on, Nikolai.
I just don't see the hating on Pierce.
No, I don't see that either.
I don't. I think Pierce is actually really good in this movie.
Yeah, every time I watch the movie, I try to nitpick Pierce, and I can't.
Actually, this is Brosnan's best for me by a mile.
Yeah,
The rest
you
are
could argue. I
tragic.
think someone could make the argument to say that obviously it's Pierce's first time doing the film, playing the role, and then because even when we were talking about Sean Connery back in the first couple of movies, Connery kind of like it takes him a while, and then once he gets to Thunderball, it's like, oh, he's really good at this role because he's very comfortable and he's very relaxed. After that, he just begins to stop caring, and same with Roger Moore. I think he kind of ramps up to being really good at his role and trying to figure out how he wants to play the role. But like, I just don't really feel that about Pierce in this movie. I think it's just, he does such a great job of dealing with the betrayal and the all the subtleties with that and how he feels about his own peer. So I don't agree with that at all, really.
Yeah, I never felt like he was uncomfortable.
I do just have one nitpicky thing so far as his performance is concerned, but it's less of a performance thing and more of an editing thing, which is that I don't think that he always needs to have some kind of comeback. Like, he doesn't have to respond to every little provocation that comes his way.
I hope the third is where your real talent lies.
One rises to meet a challenge.
Like, sometimes I think it's better if a character just says nothing.
I hope the third is where your real talent lies.
James, what an unpleasant surprise. We aim to please. James, what an unpleasant surprise. Where's the girl? Find her.
But at the same time, that's Bond's thing, right? As Alec himself even points out.
No glib remark? No pithy comeback?
I agree with Nikolai with the music, which we kind of talked about. I'm not saying I outright hate all of the music. It's just, I think there are spots in the music or the in the score that aren't the best.
Yeah, and I can understand. I personally really like the soundtrack. Like I said, I think it's cool. There's only one scene where I could have done with no music at all, and that would have been the statue yard. It kind of goes sentimental. I don't know.
MI6 figured I was too young to remember.
But the idea that Pierce Brosnan, who had been a steady working actor for a long time, is nervous, and that reflects in his... I mean, I can't help but think the same, and forgive me, McCurdy, but I can't help but think the same thing as, oh yeah, Roger Moore didn't want to beat up on Maude Adams, and it shows in his performance. And I go, no, just because he secretly, behind the scenes, didn't want to do that doesn't mean that it shows in his performance. He's still a professional actor. I just stuff like that I see as behind the scenes knowledge bleeding in.
So tell me, like, the first day on the shoot, you're Bond, you're the new Bond. I mean, is it one of the things you walk in and the camera goes, oh, this is a new Bond, this little fella.
Sure, you go on the set and there's a crew there of 160 guys and they're all waiting for you to do your thing. I mean, the pressure for me, I screwed my finger up. I sliced the tendon in this little finger.
Yeah.
About 8 weeks before I did the film. So I had a finger that was like this. You know, I had a splint for 7 weeks. When I took the splint off, I took it off the morning of shooting. And the first scene that I had to do was with Robbie Coltrane. Big guy. Here I am as James Bond. He comes into shot, and I put the gun to his head. Okay? Now, my finger, I put the gun to his head, and he says the line, what does he say? Only 3 men in the world own that gun, Walter PPK, and I've killed 2 of them. And then it rakes focus to me, and I've got the gun. I'm supposed to say, lucky me. I say, lucky me, and my finger goes, donk. So it was like, sorry. It was just, it wasn't. It was nerve-wracking because you feel a bit silly. So I said, I'm sorry, guys, let's go again. It's okay. And Martin Campbell was very nervous. Everybody was very nervous. Everybody's looking to me to be the man. So we went again. It was like, lucky me, and then it kind of squeezed out. So I had to strap it down, the finger.
Right, yeah.
I'm sure in interviews he said he was nervous. Who wouldn't be nervous? The question is, does that show in the performance? And I don't see it. I read that comment and then I watched the movie 3 times in a row and I kept trying to find a moment where Pierce reflected that idea. And I'm like, I can't find it. I think Pierce Brosnan just kicks ass.
Do you know what gun this is?
Walther PPK.
Walther PPK. 7.65 millimeter. Only 3 men I know use such a gun.
That's another thing I could add to the list of everything. They handle the Walther PPK thing correctly, right? Where it's not exclusively a James Bond thing. Other people use that gun, but it's also specific to Bond. Not exclusive, specific.
Only one person we know uses this sort of gun.
It makes no sense that Spectre would only know one guy that uses a Walther PPK.
The American CIA swear by them.
It makes complete sense that Valentine would know at least a handful.
I believe I've killed 2 of them.
Blastoise says it has the most overbloated Bond. Blastoise says it has the most overbloated first act in the series. Bond always receives debriefing from M.
No one
and
else likes this movie.
Q gadgets by the 30-minute mark at the latest. Here, who cares? Here it is at the 1 hour mark that he even begins the mission, and even then, not much espionage work. Blastoise,
That's
who
the
cares?
dumbest thing I've heard, dude.
Blastoise says hydro pump.
It's the dumbest.
Blastoise, it doesn't have to stick to a given formula. Like I said before, the reason why GoldenEye is such a strong shift is that it gets away from the idea of Bond walks into Universal Exports. Moneypenny is sitting there, and her desk is right here. And then Bond says some things after throwing his hat on the rack, and he walks frame left through a double door into M's office. M then debriefs him. Yeah. Same thing every time, to the minute. That's why I'm such a fan of License to Kill. Even if License to Kill I would still rank it where I did, even if it was the second movie ever made or whatever. But the overall idea is I appreciate when things change and when they shift up.
That is the typical kind of thing you see in someone trying to write a script based off of one thing's supposed to happen versus how it naturally develops in the story. And definitely, as we've pointed out in this movie, the beginning of the story happens for a reason because it's supposed to take place in like 86, 87, and it's supposed to establish that Bond had this previous mission that things happen. He lost an agent that, he was friends with, and his espionage happens while he's trying to figure out what's going on with Onatopp because he's very suspicious of her. He's trying to figure out why they're trying to steal this helicopter.
Well, and don't forget that the main theme of the movie is that there's no espionage to be done because the Cold War is over. But as you pointed out, there's still espionage action type of stuff, spy stuff. So there's like virtually no complaint here.
And then to see like, oh, but the briefing happens so late in the movie. I'm like, there was briefings that happened late in the previous Moore movies, and it wasn't a big deal that it happened so late in the movie. Like From Russia with Love and You Only Live Twice spend so much time going over the villain's scheme as to like what is going on, especially You Only Live Twice. And it's just like we're watching the rocket happen and get stolen and all this stuff. And it takes forever. And then finally we get to Bond. This movie, at least, we see a little bit of the villain scheme, but we also are following Bond and we're kind of catching up. And then on top of all of that, like we mentioned in the beginning, this movie happened post-Cold War. And if you don't realize how much of a big deal that was to make a spy movie that is a character that was supposed to be during the Cold War, after the Cold War had ended, you're kind of missing the point. I think that's like, to say this is an over-bloated beginning, I'm like, it kind of reestablishes the character not only with this new actor, but also with, hey, we're making Bond for a new era. Cold War's over, but, spy stuff still goes on, guys. Like, this is what we're dealing with.
I just disagree completely with the idea that every Bond movie has to be exactly the same to the minute. It's bloated just because it's different. I reject that. But let's hear what Blastoise has to say, though, because we've only read a sentence of what he has to say.
All Blastoise can say is Blastoise.
Technically, yes. Is that
How drunk are you?
So anyway, backtracking.
Don't
Here it is
unsubscribe.
Hold on.
I'm sorry.
Here it is at the 1 hour mark that he even begins the mission, and he even Scott, shut the fuck up!
Too.
God damn it!
Is laughing too. Let's hear what Blastoise has.
Here it is at the 1 hour mark that he even begins the mission, and even then, not much espionage work. He rendezvous with Jack Wade, then meets Zukovsky, which leads him to 006 to get captured immediately. When the action does arrive, it's nonstop with no time to breathe. There's just no intrigue. Oh, good God. That is objectively false. I mean, the entire movie, Bond is trying to solve several mysteries. What's the plan with the helicopter? What's the plan with the GoldenEye? Who is behind Giannis? Oh, wait. It's my old 00 buddy I witnessed getting murdered. And when you total everything up, the theft of a helicopter to steal a doomsday weapon by a 00 who betrays his government because his government betrayed his people, because his people betrayed their country, is the very definition of intrigue. It's very much point A to B, tying all the set pieces together as fast as possible so the ADD generation doesn't get bored. The fastest betting of any Bond girl for Natalia. What? From meeting in the helicopter to escaping the train couldn't have been 2 hours. But what happened in those 2 hours? I'd fuck Bond for that. And technically they don't bang until they get to Cuba. And he never even flirts with her.
I suppose that depends on what kind of weapon you're talking about disarming.
She hates him, then immediately wants to bang because the explosion gave her a concussion. Dude, again, let me flash her face as James Bond is pursuing in a fucking tank, and she's like, in that moment, the super soaker is turned on. I mean, you would fuck him at that point.
As soon as a man is chasing you in a tank.
Yeah, I mean, whether they were minor or major Bond girls, there have been far faster bettings where Bond didn't even have to do anything, let alone rescue a woman from an arch nemesis.
How do you kill 5 hours in Rio if you don't samba?
Judi Dench's M never got the right chemistry with Bond until Craig came along, in my opinion.
You've got a bloody cheek.
Sorry.
We'll definitely talk about this more when we get to Casino, but I guess for now it's interesting to note that when Judi Dench's M is dealing with Pierce Brosnan, it's a much older Bond, and then when she's dealing with Daniel Craig, it's a fresh Bond. But in both scenarios, Bond still has this Bond-esque arrogance that he's right and everybody else is wrong. So in one way, it's apples and oranges, in another way, not so much. But either way, I think that scene between him and M just perfectly brings us into this post-Cold War who is Bond scenario.
You're a sex dinosaur.
And they shouldn't even bother with Moneypenny if they are going to shit on the flirtatious chemistry that Moore/Connery had with Lois Maxwell that made the character interesting and give Brosnan the cold shoulder in the awkward safety door. Q gets some of his best bits since Octopussy. I think the scene between him and Moneypenny is hot.
Is this still Blastoise?
It's still Blastoise. Instead of a main baddie, we get 4 henchmen, and they are all unique villains. It works. But 006 is not convincing as 007's greatest best friend.
Losing time, James! Lost call!
Buy me a pint!
Well, they never say they're BFF or anything like that. They throw around the word friend, but they're fellow 00s. There's some weight to that.
I trusted you, Alec.
Trust. What a quaint idea.
You can't say it's bloated, but then also say there's not enough substance between them. They're just fellow 00s. That's all you need to know.
Shut the door, Alec! There's a draft! Alec?
There needed to be more substance to their past, and why does 006 hold such a grudge for Bond cutting the timer in half if it's his fault he faked his death? Well, because he's an asshole. That's why Bond says, should I feel sorry for you? Why does only he get his face burned and not the general? Well, because Ormov was already outside the building.
Yeah.
Okay, obviously Blastoise didn't rewatch the movie.
Yeah. I can't tell if Blastoise is joking here. He says, and Boris's riddle is obviously chair. Is it, though?
Well,
Blastoise, are you joking about that?
After
is
you
it
watched
chair?
The movie, yeah.
I don't think it's obviously chair. I think chair is a stupid answer. And I will always blame this as the film for creating the one-man army Bond cliche. Instead of being caught in between two rival factions like the Living Daylights, Bond can now shoot his way out by himself against hundreds of enemies, plus a big downgrade in stunts coming off of License to Kill. That being said, a neat epilogue to Cold War Bond. Enjoy it for what it is as the series becomes a shadow of itself. My ranking, number 10, he says, For Your Eyes Only, From Russia With Love, Goldfinger, On Her Majesty's Secret Service, The Spy Who Loved Me, Dr. No, Thunderball, Octopussy, The Living Daylights, GoldenEye, Live and Let Die, You Only Live Twice, Moonraker, License to Kill, A View to a Kill, The Man with the Golden Gun, Diamonds Are Forever. I read all of that off of acronyms.
Wow.
I'm impressed with myself.
That's a good question. Is this the most one army Bond we've seen so far? I would almost agree with him to that point. The tank scene, I think, is
I think more like the miss of the commando
one
scene
army
at the end.
Bond scene we've seen.
Yeah, I'm more on with Charlie. I think it's more about like the fact that he does get captured. He gets captured. There's explosions, people running around, but it's not so much a commando scene. He gets captured.
Scene.
We're not talking about the tank scene. Catch up, bro. I guess I kind of see what he's saying about like the one person army, and even in the beginning of the movie when he's trying to get away from them.
Has Bond faced more villains at a single point and gotten away?
Well, let's break it down. Because there's a big it depends here. There are 3 main scenes where Bond faces off against a bunch of dudes, whereas before we would just have commando sequences, big battles, big drawn-out battles. These are somewhat different, but it's not Bond going against a giant army like those old commando scenes, just getting rid of the commandos. So the 3 scenes are the opening, but Bond is running away. He kind of has that advantage of running away up until the point that Oromov calls off the forces. Most likely because he was counting on Bond to surrender, because he literally had no way of escape other than the hope that he could get into the plane in time. Hold your fire because I want to capture this guy, not kill him. Bond goes from being completely trapped in the gas tank chamber.
You can't win.
To being so desperate that he's willing to jump off a cliff to escape. Scene number 2 is the escaping the archives plus the tank chase. And the archives, again, enclosed space, Bond's running away. Bond gets away, Bond gets in a tank and faces off against some soldiers and police officers who cannot face down his tank. The third scene is then the finale where he sneaks in to sabotage via bomb. He gets captured. Exploding pen becomes backup bomb that then allows him to escape. So this all goes back to my old arguments about keeping Bond alive and doing so in a believable way. Instead of just Bond surviving all these assassins, it's Bond is put in certain situations that he uses his brain to get out of, or his brute strength, even if that's in the form of a tank. When you look at each scene individually, Bond doesn't kill everybody in these 3 scenes. He kills just enough to get away. Yes, there are a lot of bad guys, but there's never a moment where you're like, this is bullshit, man. Yeah, Bond blows a couple of clips off like Rambo, but it's not a battle to the last man standing, which we may or may not see in another movie. The way it's put together, it's believable that he could escape these situations. And that's really what he's doing just about every time, is he is escaping, not fighting a battle, which, yes, Blastoise, would be absurd. Ricardo Cantoral says, GoldenEye isn't a poor movie, but it's by far the most overrated film in the franchise. The movie is just a pastiche of old Bond films, and it never has the guts to really examine Bond's character. God damn it! Did any of you watch the same movie we watched? I can't understand anything anybody's saying.
No. I agree. I'm the same way because
Bond's character's all over this fucking movie.
If you want to watch a pastiche of the Bond films, go back and watch The Spy Who Loved Me, which is a very obvious pastiche of a bunch of Bond films.
We even said that movie was the best of Bond. It was literally just take all the best of and cram it into one thing.
This movie didn't look at his character. Are you crazy? Have you watched the movie?
I said this movie has everything, but it was everything, not just recycling old stuff, but it took all those themes and all those tropes and it made it into something completely new.
Well, we don't get, there's no train scene in this movie that is there's a train, but there's no train scene where they're like going from one place to the other in a train.
And it's
which I
romantic
think is a trope in a lot of films. There's no Bond, there's a Bond car, but there is no supercar Bond chase.
Nope.
There is a chase scene, but it's very specific to this movie.
Yeah.
You know, like it's not just a car chase. Bond is not escaping in the tank. Bond is chasing somebody in a tank.
And that's what's so cool about that scene is that they're chasing Bond and then it flips and suddenly Bond is chasing them and they're terrified about it.
Down the alley.
None of this movie feels like it's stale or if it's, oh, we've seen this before. It all is fresh and it's the product of clearing house entirely, of taking everybody who made 16 movies straight and either they died or they got rid of them. I mean, it doesn't matter. It's like they sat there for 6 years going, hey, what is Bond? And they just, and they nailed it. It is literally the phoenix rising from the ashes and becoming a brand new movie that takes everything that is Bond and renews it.
It took a new, fresh set of eyes. It looks at the old material, says, how can we make this into a modern film? And how does this film, what does this film say about what's going on currently in the world? And it does it in such a great way of, it's still an action film. It's still a film that you can go and watch and you're like, this is fun. I love this. But it still makes it's still commenting on the idea that is Bond still relevant? Like that's the whole theme throughout this movie is James Bond, is the James Bond franchise, is it still relevant? And I think the answer to the movie is definitely yes.
Yeah. So our
Thanks
last comment
for being
here,
a subscriber. Welcome to getting shit on.
Oh my God.
Qwerty Manor says, yeah, it's overrated. Brosnan is overrated. Besides, the world is not enough. And it feels like an apology to License to Kill. So that being said, let me just lay out my theory on this. Because just like Living Daylights, remember, this is the best movie ever because Timothy Dalton's in it. I'm getting the same feeling I had back with Secret Service. I'm talking to you, Nikolai, you motherfucker. Secret Service is a movie that is obviously flawed and is obviously not at the top of the list. If you have a fucking brain in your head, if you are telling the truth, you may like it. I like the movie, but if you're honest with yourself, it's not at the top. But there are people out there, let's call them hipsters, as I've had in the past, who will say that they'll purposely take something that they know in their heart is inferior, and they'll elevate it to being the greatest thing ever. Again, I always use the example of vinyl. Oh, vinyl. Vinyl. It's the best thing ever. It snaps, crackles, and pops. I love it. You have these people who will take something that is clearly less than perfect, and they'll elevate it because they get a certain sense of, I don't know, superiority out of it. George Lazenby only made one movie, and you might not have heard of it. Maybe you didn't hear about it, but I know about it. It's the best Bond movie ever. Oh, you've heard of Casino Royale? You've heard of GoldenEye? Oh, those movies are so mainstream. Oh. It's got this hipster feel to it, and then the reverse of that is something like GoldenEye, where it clearly deserves credit. Maybe it's not at the top of your list. That's fine. You know, this is all subjective. But taking something that clearly deserves credit and then shitting on it and saying it's overrated. I'm not a sports fan, but I know that Tom Brady is on. But he's clearly the best that's ever lived.
I think what you're getting at, Charlie, is that I don't quite 100% agree with you about the Honor Majesty's Secret Service. I think there's actually legitimate reasons why people like that movie other than... And I get what you're saying.
But saying it's the best Bond movie ever made, you have to be a hipster asshole. No, I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about people out there who say it's the best one ever made. They're just being hipster assholes. And then with this, it's the reverse.
I think it's more what you're talking about in the second half. I think specifically with GoldenEye, you look at that movie compared to a lot of the other Bond films. It was the first to have a video game that I think had a life of its own. Like I think some of these other Bond films, even prior to this, had a video game attached to it. Films after this movie had a video game attached to it. But nobody talks about those video games because they weren't that good. They weren't that revolutionary. And I bring up the video game because it was such a big deal with this specific movie. And I think it adds to the popularity of this movie. This movie, again, like it is a revitalization of the Bond franchise in the 90s. It had a very successful video game. The movie itself was very successful. It had a successful James Bond. Like there's a lot of reasons to like the movie. And I think that's why it gets like the reverse, or the people who want to be antagonistic towards the movie or just want to be contrarian because they're like, well, it had all these other successes. It was a huge commercial success. It was a huge commercial success. But I think like what you're saying though, is it owes it to the fact that it had a really good story. And it just so happened that the story really told a lot about that particular time and why is Bond still relevant. And it does all those things.
Were most of the comments negative?
Every comment
is like, this
negative.
movie's overrated. And I don't think the movie is overrated. I think it's definitely, if you were not to place this number one, I definitely can see it in anybody's, again, there's 25 of these movies. So for me, it's like, if it's in the top 8, top 10, I think it's where it needs to be. Probably more than top 10, really. So at this point, so it's got to be in the top 8, really, or top 5, if you're really like being honest with yourself, because it's a great movie. It's kind of perfect. There's a reason why it was popular. There's a reason why it was so successful.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. What I'm getting at is that it's like hating the most popular kid in school because of their success, as opposed to, hate the most popular kid in school because they're an asshole. But then when you find out that most popular kid is actually a really good person, and you're like, I hate you even more.